Our next speaker is Jim Harper. Jim Harper is the Director of Information Policy at the Cato Institute, and he's the author of the book Identity Crisis: How Identification is Overused and Misunderstood. Harper focuses on the difficult problems of adapting law and policy to the unique problems of the information age. He's also a member of the Homeland Security's Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee, and his work has been cited by the USA Today, the Associated Press, and Reuters. Jim Harper also once flew from San Francisco to D.C. without identification on a dare, and both he and the nation lived to see another day.
He did it in 1972.
I was too young to fly back then. I wasn't born, I'd like to say, but that's not true. We're going to have a wide-ranging discussion today, obviously, and an interesting one, good for CFP, I think. I'm going to focus more on the national security issues than cybersecurity, and sweep right past the implied tension in the title of our panel between security and privacy. Because whether on the merits there is tension between security and privacy, I think that the specter of terrorism has put the two into tension for political purposes and for public policy purposes. So rather than talk about privacy so much, I want to talk about terrorism some. In 4 years that I've been on the DHS Privacy Committee, I've realized that you really can't have a sensible conversation about privacy, and frankly you can't balance privacy and security, while terrorism is misunderstood. And so I've been spending a lot of time on terrorism and counterterrorism over the last year or so, and I want to share a little bit about that with a sort of long view. How is terrorism doing these days? I think it's fair to say terrorism has had a pretty good decade, but we are starting to turn things back, and the country is starting to turn things back. I think the lagging indicator may be the politicians and the folks that we call our leaders. Let me point you to a couple of resources online that might be helpful to you. We had a conference in January at Cato, just the week before the new administration came in, on counterterrorism and counterterrorism strategy. And we brought 30-plus nationally recognized experts on terrorism to talk about terrorism, talk about that problem. You can find it at cato.org/counterterrorism. And in addition, concurrently on Cato's online magazine, Cato Unbound, we held a discussion about how to communicate about terrorism. That was called Keep Calm and Carry On. Cato Unbound is at cato-unbound.org. And the January meeting had a number of communications experts and terrorism experts to work on this problem of terrorism. At the conference, we dug into the issues that are that so dominate the discussion in public and in the press. We looked at the capability of Al-Qaeda and other terror networks to the extent there are. It's clearly on the wane to the experts that study them carefully. The viability of various so-called WMD attacks, the fact that they are easy to do and that bad guys have a lot of capability to do them is taken as a given, but it's not necessarily the case. Although that doesn't mean we ever have to sort of walk away and pretend like it's an impossibility. How do we organize and rationalize domestic security? Obviously the federal government has taken a huge role, but just like all politics, all terror attacks are going to be local, and the response will be local as well. So moving away from federal control of domestic security is probably better. What motivates terrorists? People who actually study terrorists. Not people here in D.C. who impute motives to terrorists from their actions, which is a mistake, or impute the reasons why to terrorists based on their actions, which is a mistake. People who actually watch terrorists and interview them and talk to them and study them statistically. And it's really interesting that their motivations blend together, of course, but they can be broken down into three: goals, grievances, and gang memberships. I think there may be a few that have huge worldwide geopolitical goals. More often than not, those are stated, because stating huge goals is a terrorist tactic. Grievances. A guy named Robert Pape at the University of Chicago has a great study showing that the number one motivator of suicide terrorism is occupation of prized lands. And so those local grievances tend to be what drive terrorism, at least in the suicide terrorism context. Gang membership is the most interesting element and maybe the newest, least understood. A lot of terrorists become terrorists to be terrorists. They don't have a strategic motivation. They'll mouth whatever goals that their groups have purportedly, but they're more in it to be in it. It's like gang membership. If you're just a two-bit hood, you're just a two-bit hood. But join the Bloods or the Crips, and all of a sudden you're badass. Likewise, around the world, people who oppose the U.S. and U.S. power can oppose U.S. power, but doing that on their own is not that big a deal. If they can associate themselves with Al-Qaeda, well, then they're badass. I think there's an emerging strategic understanding of terrorism. That terrorism seeks overreaction. Terrorists are weak actors who try to get strong actors like the United States and Western countries to overreact and do the work for them. So waste of blood and treasure. When the United States goes to war, for example, for purposes we realize now were mistaken, that wastes our blood and treasure. That wastes trillions of dollars, perhaps, thousands and thousands of lives, our own and Iraqi and other. Our overreactions bring recruiting and sympathy gains to terrorists, and we see that terrorism is motivated by some of the responses that the U.S. has taken to the 9/11 attacks. And it provides us, I think, the most interesting and new insight, which is not new to Michael German from the ACLU, who will be moderating a panel tomorrow. The terrorists have an ideological story that they tell themselves and that they tell others. And overreaction on the part of victim states like the United States tends to confirm the ideological narrative of terrorists. What does that prescribe for us in terms of counterterrorism strategy? Well, obviously to avoid overreaction by not going to war, by not killing people who shouldn't be killed, and by not confirming that terrorist narrative that the United States is an evil power. Meticulous good behavior on the part of victim states is good strategic counterterrorism. And by that I include according civil rights and civil liberties to the people of the country attacked, and according civil rights and civil liberties to alleged terrorists. Not because it's nice or moral or constitutional, though those are all important, but because it's good strategic counterterrorism. Most important, I think, and least realized is that American leaders and Western leaders have to avoid exalting terrorism and avoid exalting terrorists. When the prior administration talked about a war on terror, that gave legitimacy in the eyes of ideological and physical neighbors of terrorists to those terrorists. And we made more important on the world stage some terrorists who we should have allowed to shrink away as evildoers, true evildoers. But instead, we've held terrorist leaders up to world acclaim among opponents of U.S. power. The goal of security is both actual security and the feeling of security. This is something that Bruce Schneier has talked about a great deal. And we have succeeded to quite a degree in the first part of security, which is actual security, but we've yet to succeed with the feeling of security. We're not better off in a 9/12 environment where we're all huddled together crying. We want to be a free country that's bold, that feels free, that knows we have a place in the world and we're welcome in the world. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the Obama administration, particularly in terms of rhetoric. Eschewing the war on terror language, I think, is very helpful, and it starts to walk the country back from unfortunate overreactions in the prior administration. Though President Obama is not immune to overstatement, I think on Friday his statement about cyber terror attacks was a little silly, and coming up with the phrase, or using the phrase, weapons of mass disruption is a little bit cartoonish. Cybersecurity is important, and it's important for the government to secure its networks. It's important for private sector to secure its networks and assets. But weapons of mass disruption is not a helpful meme to add to the debate. More importantly than the rhetoric, though, is the substance. And on that, the Obama administration has yet to show real progress. I think it's fair to say, and just briefly, that presidents and executive branches don't give up power that their predecessors acquired. So don't think that because you like President Obama on a number of reasons that he's going to give away the power that the Bush administration tried to bring to the executive branch of the government. We have to take that power back, and hopefully in a better, more sensible terrorism environment, all of us can on the political stage, courts can as well. So I think the prognosis is good, but we won't quickly come back into balance in terms of privacy and security. Thanks.